Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Play Talk. Happy Friday. We're normally we interview the guests at the beginning of the show, but this time around, Senator Kramer, just scheduling worked better. He's going to be in the second half of the show. He's going to be joining us at 11:30. I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about for him. But for the first part of the show, it's just me and Mr. Chad Oban.
Chadwick
Oban.
Yeah.
Chadwick von Oban III is what I've decided.
I think what we should do is we should give responses to what we think Senator Kramer is going to say in the second half of the show.
You think so?
Just
why don't we just wait and interview him?
Okay. Well, I just want to see who's the better prognosticator on what he's going to say.
Maybe.
I'm guessing he's going to say the House is a mess. That's what I'm guessing Kevin Kramer is going to say. But
the House is a mess. Although they did get through. It is. I'll tell you. This wasn't. We're gonna in a minute. We're gonna talk about some ongoing controversy about NDGOP resolutions, just scintillating stuff. But I do. It's kind of interesting when I look at Speaker Johnson, because when he came up, everyone was kind of scrutinizing him. Very MAGA aligned. Very Trumpy, was very involved in sort of the efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And then it's like, I've seen so many Republicans go from being kind of normal Republicans to like MAGA Republicans. Johnson seems to be going the other way, because now here we are, he's cutting deals with Democrats to push needed bills across. And by the way, if you're wondering, the rules vote this morning that allows foreign aid bills to come to the floor and be voted on individually, that has kind of become at the crux of a showdown between Speaker Johnson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and other Matt Gaetz and other MAGA people. That passed. Our Congressman Kelly Armstrong voted for it, which I think was the right vote. But it's kind of amazing. Like Johnson, he's working. It's like there's like bipartisanship coming out of all this.
It is different when you get to the big chair, right? I think he's starting to see the big picture, that what he says and does matters more than when he was just a backbencher, when you can just do things for political reasons. I assume we'll get into this more with Kramer, but I got to tell you, this handful of far-right folks in the House that all they want to do is, Dusty Johnson, the congressman from South Dakota, referred to them as knuckleheads in his official. Representative Crenshaw, said clearly these guys care more about Putin winning the war than they do about what's happening in America, and that they clearly want to be in the minority. But I think that's the question that I think needs to be asked is, hasn't the GOP in the U.S. House proven they can't govern? Wouldn't the country be better off with the Democrats in charge of the House right now? Because with the way this is going, it's worthless. It's absolutely worthless.
Yeah. Obviously, that's a more complex question than it seems. Because you could argue, as a conservative, I don't really want Democrats in charge of the House of Representatives. Their policy agenda doesn't match my own. The problem is, on the other hand, if the Republican caucus can't function, then what's the point?
Well, and I think that as we're looking forward to this 2024 election, chances are we're going to have a Democrat House and a Republican Senate. Both chambers are going to flip. Maybe that leads to better policy. Maybe that leads to better conversations, regardless of who the president is. But
I'll be interested in hearing what Senator Kramer has to say about the chambers flipping. But I do think, to your point, we are at a point right now. We look at some of the things happening in the Middle East. Israel has. Iran has launched a direct attack on Israel. Typically in the past, Iran does it kind of through proxies and stuff, so that there's not like an open escalation directly between the two countries. Israel just retaliated. Now, officially Israel saying they were involved, but I think the Pentagon has said that they were. There are serious, and then you got Russia and Ukraine, all of these things, China and Taiwan. I mean, the world needs American leadership right now. The Americans can't lead if Congress isn't functional. Congress can't function if the House majority can't get its act together. So
I think that's exactly right. And you talk about the foreign policy stuff, but that's on top of all the domestic stuff we have going on as well. Yeah. And you essentially have the federal government shut down because a handful of far-right GOP members have shut down the ability.
If people like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene have put us in a position where I feel like having my preferred ideological leadership in the House is a luxury. I mean, at this point, I have to lower the bar and say, I just want Congress to function so that we can lead our country and fulfill our duties in helping to lead the world.
And good for Speaker Johnson to step up and basically say, listen, my role in, protecting our country, and he talked about having a son in the military. He takes that very, very seriously, and good for him. And if he loses the speakership, so be it. And there's also this move now, right now, one person can move to vacate the speaker. I mean, there's a move now to change that rule. And people like Lauren Colbert has said that's the line in the sand. That's when she'll kick the guy out.
When it was Kevin McCarthy, we had this debate, and the Democrats didn't bail McCarthy out, and you defended the Democrats. And I'm still not sure I agree with you on that, but let's put a pin in that. I feel like this is a very different situation. I feel like Speaker Johnson is not Speaker McCarthy. Speaker Johnson has shown that he is reaching out and he's working with them. I mean, this bipartisan vote on the rules thing today is an example. He's cut deals with them. I think it's a different situation. If Democrats side with Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene again to get Johnson out, then shame on them, I think.
Yeah, and I think the big difference is, Kevin McCarthy spent millions and millions and millions of dollars trying to defeat all these moderate Dems in previous elections, right? I think there is some animosity. Like, why are we going to help
Republicans? Every Republican is going to try to defeat every Democrat. I don't think that's enough.
But now you spend $1 million to try to defeat me and spend negative ads against me, and now you're saying I need your help. Mike Johnson hasn't done that. He hasn't spent millions and millions and millions of dollars against these folks. So I think it goes to your point that there might be less animosity towards this speaker than the previous.
The standard can't be that Republicans try to defeat Democrats at the ballot box. I think if you want, I think you look at McCarthy and to me, what more justifying of what the Democrats did to him is some of the stuff he did with Trump, where he went back and forth about January 6th. I think some of the and less so the ballot box politics, but the internal politics in the House, where he burned Democrats some different ways. I think that, to me, matters more than, of course, a Republican is trying to defeat Democrats at the ballot box.
If Kevin McCarthy's running ads against you in your district saying you're a socialist who wants to kill babies, that's going to stick in your craw a little bit, Rob.
I'm sure that Speaker Paul Ryan remembered it when Democrats were accusing him of trying to push.
Yes.
That kind of, admittedly, that sort of rhetoric, which comes from both sides, has made is a factor. It's not the factor, but it's certainly a factor in why Congress can't function. Right. Our need to not just I oppose this person, but also I hate this person and they're a bad person is unfair.
But it's one thing to say function, but I think Democrats with McCarthy were looking at, well, why should we bail him out? Yeah. It's not just I'm willing to work with you, but why should I work with you to fix your own house? I'm hearing that with Democrats right now in North Dakota who are saying, okay, the far right is taking over your legislative district, or the far right is taking over the state party, and now you want me to cross over the primary and help vote for you? Good luck. Yeah.
I don't think we're going to see. Anyway, we don't need to have a debate about how many Democrats are going to cross over. I would be surprised. I don't think there's going to be a lot, not even for Cara Mund. I think they're going to stay home, but we'll find out. By the way, speaking of Matt Gaetz and everything, the thing that happened this week, and we want to bring this issue home, Matt Gaetz in our House race, endorsed Rick Becker. And the remarkable thing is why anybody would want Matt Gaetz's endorsement. Now, I guess I'm saying that, of course, I don't like the populism and the sort of MAGA world stuff that Matt Gaetz stands for. But I'm wondering how many North Dakota voters are looking at what's happening in Washington, D.C. They're looking at that House majority. They're looking at the number of young Republican members of that caucus who are bailing out. There was just another one, a 38-year-old guy from Kansas. That's right. I'm forgetting his name now. He's coming out. I mean, it's down to the point. I wrote that article about Kelly Armstrong. If he's elected governor, and they still have a 1-vote majority, and he gets sworn in on December 15th, his term doesn't end for a few weeks after that. So how,
but don't you think
that's how new everything is?
The Matt Gaetz thing for Becker is about him being able to raise money. And if you look at the most recent FEC reports, he has a lot of catching up to do to catch up to Julie Fedorchuk.
Well, depending on how willing he's going to be to spend the 66% of his funds that he's loaned to himself.
Rob, has he historically spent his loaned money, or is he just...
He's done it one other time. He did it in the Senate race, and he did not spend it.
Okay. It is such a, we've talked about a lot of the different cynical things that Becker and his folks do, but that's a perfect example. I'm going to loan my campaign money so I can call up people and say, look at all this money I've raised, and then you pull the money back. It's just silly. Silly stuff.
Yeah. By the way, if we look at actual donations money that came from people who are not the candidate, Julie Fedorchuk, leads him by basically doubled. What he took in.
And Trigby's got to be close to where Becker is as well, I would think. I can't remember.
I think they're pretty, because Trigby was 200 and some thousand, and I think Becker was 238. Don't quote me on that. You could go look them up. But yeah, right. I mean, they were pretty neck and neck. By the way, I still think if Rick Becker is the Republican nominee heading into the general, that's a race between him and Trigby. I have a lot of Republicans saying, no, it's still, I don't think they understand how disliked Rick Becker is by a lot of people who might be willing to jump the ballot.
I also think the messaging that Becker is using, I'm going to be part of the Freedom Caucus, I'm going to be a bull in a china shop. That's not what people want right now. Maybe it's enough to get him 30% in the primary to be the nominee, but I don't think that's what people want.
China's licking its chops looking at Taiwan. Russia's trying to take over Ukraine. Israel and Iran, tensions there. They're at the brink of war, and we want to send more dysfunctional people to Congress? Right. No, thank you.
And North Dakota's never done that, right? When you think about the Democrats we've sent in the Senate, the Democrats we've sent, the members of Congress, Rick Berg, Kelly Armstrong, Earl Pomeroy, they're not the people who just go in and rattle cages as Rick Becker claims he's going to do.
And by the way, speaking about, the Matt Gaetz thing being gross, it's not just ideological. I'm reading a headline just out this morning from ABC News. Matt Gaetz attended 2017 party where minors and drugs were present, according to a sworn statement from a woman obtained by Congress, the Ethics Commission. Now, I should note that he's been through a criminal investigation for that. He denies everything, but there's so many stories about this guy, like showing pictures of nude women that he alleges
on the floor of the House
to other members of Congress, which, by the way, if somebody shows you that, speak up. Like, that's gross behavior. No partisan loyalty or anything should apply. If somebody's doing that, whoever's not speaking up about that,
Rob, I would say at some point with Representative Gaetz, there's so much smoke around these sort of young women and all that kind of stuff. At some point, there's going to be some truth to it. This is a sworn statement, and I don't know. I can't believe we're talking about Matt Gaetz. That's not where I expected us to go this morning, but here we are as he's blown up Congress again.
Yeah. All right. Let's move to blowing up the NDGOP convention, because it's sort of Matt Gaetz disciples that. So this is. I'm going to need to set this up because this is a little complicated. So if you were following my coverage and obviously other people's coverage of the NDGOP convention, you know that spoiled ballots were an issue, particularly in the House race. At the convention, you had Alex Balazs and Julie Fedorchuk who were competing for the endorsement. And then you had Rick Becker, who was at the convention but couldn't seek the endorsement because he left the party to run against the endorsed Republican Senate candidate as an independent last cycle. And so what Becker does is he sends out, and I got a hold of the text message. I broke that story. He sent out a text message to his supporters saying, spoil your ballots. Basically the idea is we're going to create chaos, spoil your ballots. And it did. It prevented if the spoiled ballots hadn't been cast, or if they hadn't counted towards the total, Julie Fedorchak wins on the first ballot. She has the endorsement. But that's the way it was done. The spoiled ballots in the House vote were counted as a part of the total. And because they were counted as a part of the total, even though Julie had about a 200 vote lead over Balazs, neither of them reached a majority of the ballots cast. And so they had to hold a second ballot, and then Fedorchak ultimately withdrew and all that. We know all that. The thing is the resolutions. Now, the convention ended, and the last thing the delegates did before they left is they voted on the resolutions. And then the party said, we're going to count these up after. Everybody can go home. We'll count them up. We'll announce the results next week. They announced the results next week. All of the resolutions passed except for one pretty extreme one about abortion, which basically calling for laws that would put women who seek abortion into jail, et cetera, et cetera. So that one failed. The other 14 passed. Among the 14 that passed were a couple of pretty controversial ones. One against carbon capture, calling it fascism. Another against, or basically supporting Becker's campaign to abolish property taxes. Now, the problem is, remember, in the House endorsement race, they counted the spoiled ballots. The ballots, they were counted as ballots cast, so they were part of the denominator when calculating who did and didn't get a majority. So with the resolutions, the problem is, on some of them, the spoiled ballots counted. On others, including the three controversial ones I just mentioned, the spoiled ballots didn't count. Now, if they had been counted, according to my unofficial calculations and other people who have done the math, those not the abortion measure resolution still fails, but then also so does the carbon and the property tax resolutions. Because
basically those spoiled ballots count as a no vote, right? Because I mean that's essentially how because they count towards the denominator, but the yes vote stays the same.
Right. So I think that makes sense. So what happened for the resolutions to pass? They needed a 2/3 majority. And so basically what happens is if you count the spoiled ballots, the denominator gets bigger, and the level that the yes votes have to hit to be a 2/3 majority gets higher.
Rob, I've got to tell you that my wife is a former math teacher, and she loves when we talk about numerators and denominators on this show. Okay. She's actually told me that. So here's one of my takeaways from this. I now understand a little bit better why so many members of the North Dakota GOP think elections are stolen. Because clearly they can't run their own elections. They can't count their own votes. So they assume nobody else can either.
Well, remember that the party wanted and evaluated using an electronic voting system to make some of this process easier and maybe, I would argue, more consistent and accurate. And they got rid of that. They had a whole debate about it at the state committee because, we can only do hand counting because
that's the computer machines.
Can't trust the computer machines. We have to do hand counting so that China doesn't come in and I guess
it's pretty clear to me that whoever is counting those votes, if it's Andrew Nias or somebody else, if they're counting the spoiled ballots some places and not other places, there were certain measures, certain resolutions, probably the two you mentioned, that they wanted to pass. Whoever this counting committee wanted to pass. Why else would you just okay, we're gonna on these 7, we're gonna count them. On these 7, we're not gonna count them.
I don't think there are tellers who counted. I don't know who did the calculations based on the counts. I don't know if there was just an error. I am not willing to accuse anybody of anything. Certainly not Andrew Nyhus. I don't know. I did talk to Nyhus for my article that's up about this, and he told me that there's going to be an audit, and the party's executive committee is going to have to take this up. Because it does seem pretty clear that an inconsistent methodology was used. I mean, not just from the endorsement race, the House endorsement race, to the resolutions vote, but also even within the resolutions vote. It doesn't appear that they counted on the right
very people who think the elections were stolen. I just saw a poll today that said 40% of Americans think Trump won in 2020. And so these very people say you can't trust anybody to count votes, can't have a consistent way of counting their votes. at their state convention at Summit. The other question I have is, Rob, is how many people voted on the resolutions? I mean, did most people stick around to vote on these things?
That's a good question. Let me look.
Well, did I just stump you? You weren't expecting to get asked questions.
Hold on. Well, no, because I want to look at the total. Because and the problem is like the resolution, like the vote numbers. If people don't understand, like the number of delegates who are there changes throughout the convention. Like people leave. Like if the race that they were there for finishes, they might take off. So I'm looking here at the total number voted. 1,259.
So probably a drop of a few hundred.
A couple hundred. I think they topped out at about 1,400 and change. So they lost a couple hundred, but that's pretty close to the full.
Yeah, that's
for being at the tail end of a very long and arduous convention. That's pretty good.
Especially after the congressional vote. I would imagine there's a lot of people after the congressional vote who were there for the congressional vote. I talked to some folks who were delegates who just came for the congressional vote. Like they weren't there on Friday or whatever day the Baszler vote was. They missed that. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think this whole thing is crazy that they didn't count the votes right. I'll say again, I think the whole resolution process for both parties are crazy. All you do is divide your party in a place where you want to add voters. But I mean, it does make sense on the property tax thing. I mean, by and large, the elected officials and like statewide, local, legislative are all adamantly opposed to this thing.
And by the way, like the carbon, I mean, based on it was still. I want to be fair to the people who support those
still over 50%.
You're still talking. I mean, we're talking about whether or not it got a supermajority. And I think in the case of the like carbon capture one, it was like half a vote away from a supermajority. So, I mean, the people in that room were very much. I mean, we know about the people who were in that room, but and you're right about the resolutions process. I can remember like years past, like this was a nothing burger. Like most people didn't even read the resolutions. They were brought up. There was like a voice vote. The resolutions are passed. Nobody read them. Nobody cared. But now you have this movement out there of people like Representative Brandon Pritchard, coming around and saying, oh, you have to be 100% loyal to the party's platform. And if you're not, you're a rhino and you're not a real Republican. And so suddenly these resolutions are getting a lot more attention than they used to.
So I want to talk about carbon capture because I've been thinking about that a lot in the last week or so. And I'm just completely befuddled by the far right not supporting carbon capture. I mean, if you claim you want to keep coal alive in the state of North Dakota, this is the way you do it.
Yeah.
And, I understand the far left being against it because they want to get rid of coal, right? I mean, that's their goal is to get rid of coal. And this is a way to keep coal and do it more cleanly.
Yeah.
But for the life of me,
it's a really odd political situation. I think one thing you got to remember is that even within the Republican coalition, there's tension between landowners and whether it's coal or whether it's oil and gas. There's always been some tension there. And then also, I think, I mean, even you saw it play out like the District 33 primary last cycle where Jessica Bell, who was very, very associated with the coal industry. In fact, now I think even when she was in the legislature, worked for one of the coal companies.
She worked for North American Coal.
Yeah. So that's so very associated with him. Keith, there was a lot of feeling that she wasn't really for, she was just for the corporatists in the. I mean, that was some of the rhetoric I was hearing. Even though she literally worked in the coal industry, it was like the wrong part of the coal industry. There's some weird dynamics going on there.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting about the workers who work in the coal industry. I mean, I've heard that they're often opposed to carbon capture, and it's like, this is your jobs, guys. I mean, right? I mean, you have to.
Well, I think some of it is some of them are just very, very invested in the idea that carbon emissions don't matter.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely it. And I think part of it is the coal industry, has been saying, not anymore, but they used to say, climate change is not a thing, carbon's not a problem, it's not a pollutant, whatever. And now it's like, but in order to save our industry, we have to pull this off. It's hard for people to wrap their heads around.
I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, and it's kind of like, I mean, I think part of the message, I mean, it's not my place to give like the industry talking points, but I mean, I think part of it is we don't sell the electricity that we generate in North Dakota. This is not electricity for North Dakotans. We ship, whether it's, we ship our ag products, we ship our energy elsewhere. And
Right.
the people who are elsewhere who are buying this stuff have decided they want less carbon intensity. Now, I imagine like if I'm a grocery store and all of a sudden people want square tomatoes, and I'm thinking to myself, well, that's stupid. Like, I think square tomatoes are dumb. What am I going to do? Like, if the people want square tomatoes, you sell them square tomatoes or you go out of business.
Right.
You know, and that's kind of the position North Dakota's in. And I don't understand why. Also, whether you believe in climate change or not, or whether you think it's as bad as Greta Thunberg thinks it is, whatever, I think as humans, developing the capacity, the technology to where we can control our impact on the climate up or down, like almost creating a thermostat for the, it's a mass oversimplification, but you know what I mean? Like, why not develop this capacity to do this?
And it's my understanding there's just the McLean County Commission just shot down a wind farm up there that was going to be used to sort of balance out the coal, you know, in terms of carbon emissions. I mean, at some point, again, I think these communities have to be more thoughtful about what does this look like moving forward? How can we continue this industry in a thoughtful way in a world where carbon is going to be regulated,
I mean, listen,
and more regulated?
I get some of the frustrations. I look at the way we have crammed wind power down people's throats with massive subsidies. I think I'm not against wind power per se.
Right.
I think in some ways we've overbuilt because we were trying to capture subsidies. I think some of the things we've done, they're not great. I think even electric cars, we've overplayed our hands somewhat when you see what's starting to happen in that industry. So I get the frustration. Like we've been chasing some things that are kind of dumb. And I can even, because if you look at carbon capture, again, what are we chasing? Tax credits, right? I mean, we have the federal government coming in and trying to incentivize it. So I understand the skepticism to a point, but there's also a point where you're cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Right. And I think that's exactly right. And I think that, again, we are going to have a carbon regulated world moving forward. And I want the coal industry to be in North Dakota for a long, long time. Right. And so I think we need to start being a little, and we have, and this is part of just sort of what we talk about every time we're on the show, this divide, right? Where people won't think about, you know, if Greta thinks we should do carbon capture, then I'm against it, right?
By the way, Greta Thunberg probably against carbon capture.
Oh, for sure, yes. Yeah, that's a good point. But, well, and maybe it's, you know, if the establishment is for carbon capture, then it must be bad. Or, you know, it's just this sort of line in the sand. If you're for it, I'm against it. And that's not a good place for the fossil fuel industry to be in.
I think it's really hard because kind of like the Chamber of Commerce crowd are the ones in the middle on this. And it's like, we're just trying to do stuff. We're trying to keep business doors open. We're trying to innovate. And don't get me wrong, like some of the economic development people, they get carried away. And there's some rent seeking and everything else that goes on there. And that's all valid criticism of them. But they have sort of the right and the left horseshoe who are united against the kind of Chamber of Commerce crowd fighting some of this stuff. And I think at the end of it, like if we can't find room to agree, then we're just going to hurt North Dakota. We're going to go back to North Dakota being a place where we're closing down school districts and all the young people are moving away and our population is aging. And we're going to go back to the bad old days. And I don't want to go back there.
And I will repeat again, we need oil and coal in the state of North Dakota to do exactly the things you just talked about in terms of funding our schools, keeping income and property taxes as low as we can. I mean, I think that some of these, you talk about cutting off your nose in spite of your face. I mean, some of these folks who want lower taxes and lower other things, but they're also doing things that slow down the industries that pay a big chunk of our taxes moving forward, so our taxes stay low. Anyway, it's interesting because I think that this, you know, the world of fossil fuels, it's not just one president or the next president. You know, this is going to be an ongoing thing where we need to find, and there's no pro-coal Democrats left in this U.S. Senate after Joe Manchin's gone.
Yeah.
That's going to be a problem.
That is going to be a problem. And by the way, I mean, you want to talk about long-term, John Hoeven started working on carbon capture when he was governor.
Yep.
That's a long time ago.
In Oregon, we're working on
That's
carbon
right.
capture.
Yeah. Not trying to take credit away from anybody.
Yep. All of them.
This has been a long-term thing. So, okay, well, we're going to stop there. We're going to go talk to Senator Kevin Cramer in the next segment.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Okay, we're going to interview Senator Cramer now. Senator, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. I mean, it's Friday and I'm trapped in Washington. I'm preparing for hopefully a bunch of amendment votes and then final passage on the extension of FISA's 702 authority, which is in and of itself a big enough story without what's going on over in the House and with what's going on with aid to Israel, Ukraine, Indo-Pacific, and all of those things. And then there's the whole political thing.
Yeah, well, I apologized actually before we even started recording that you're in the United States Senate. It feels like every time you come on, we're talking about what's happening in the House of Representatives. But
well, they're more interesting than us. That's by design.
It's frustrating to watch.
Yeah,
they had a rules vote this morning. Your colleague Congressman Armstrong voted to basically change the rule. If I'm understanding all this right, change it so that some of the foreign aid packages you were just talking about could be voted on individually. And basically get those things on the floor and bring them to a vote. And I'll tell you, I mean, of all the things that I think frustrate me about Congress, Kevin, I get really frustrated when people won't let a vote happen.
Yeah.
I understand sometimes that happens because maybe it's just premature. The vote shouldn't come. I mean, there are valid reasons maybe, but sometimes it's like, why are you afraid of just putting yourself on the record? Yes or no? Like, let this have an up or down vote.
So that is a great observation and an important point, because up until very recently, Rob, the majority party always voted for the rule and the minority party always voted against the rule. And it's a shirt and skins sort of game, because the rule in the House, the rule is everything. It's the Rules Committee as a committee selected solely by the leaders of the two parties. There's no vote, by the caucuses or anything like that. So they're really there to sort of guard how debate moves forward. So they debate things like, how many amendments are we going to allow? How much time for each side? It's not brain surgery, and it's generally not a bigger deal, but it's become a bigger deal because in the case you're talking about just now, Congressman Armstrong voted yes, several Republicans voted no, and several Democrats voted yes. So in some respects, what you do end up with is a little bit more bipartisanship, because when extremes of the majority party rebel against the majority party, you suddenly have a little bit more of a moderate outcome. And for some people, they might prefer that. I actually think in the case of this very narrowly divided House, with a speaker who has to live every day and work every day and make major decisions every day, with his head in a vice, that Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz could, pop at any moment. It actually it can have the outcome of a more balanced, if you will, approach in the House of Representatives, remembering the Speaker of the House is not the majority leader. The Speaker of the House is the Speaker of the House. And while the majority party generally has a Speaker, it's a pretty darn important job. So, yeah, it is frustrating to watch. I want to speak to the other point, though, because the Senate has the other problem. The Senate's problem is that the leadership of each of the parties, particularly the majority party, but again, remember, it's basically a 50-50 Senate. When you throw in the independents that caucus with Democrats, it's 51-49. But the one leader has so much authority that right now, as I mentioned earlier, we're preparing, hopefully at some time in the next several hours, to vote on the extension of 702 authority under FISA, which we can get into if you want. But what's holding us up is they're whipping on all these amendments. In fact, Senator Durbin and I have probably the most likely amendment to pass. And you'd think that would be a good thing, except some people don't want an amendment because they want to pass it and send it over to the president for signature rather than send it back to the House for another day, which technically FISA expires at midnight tonight, all of these things. And so when the reason they whip the vote is because if there's an amendment that's going to pass, they want to find a way to not have a vote on it. And as you know, because you know me so well, I have always objected to the notion that someone else would determine whether I have a vote or not. Nobody elected us to yield our vote to one person, or nobody elected us to yield our vote to one committee, the Rules Committee, which doesn't even really hear the record, if you will. So, yeah, this idea of avoiding hard votes, I've often said, you don't need any of us if you're going to empower such a small group of people to make these decisions for you.
Senator, currently conventional wisdom is that the Dems will take the House, Republicans will take the Senate. Based on what you just talked about here, regardless who wins the presidency, will Washington be a better place if those?
It may be. The divided government can work, Chad. I mean, in my view, throughout history, divided governments worked quite well. The difference being that more recently, it hasn't worked so well because the division is, first of all, number-wise, so narrow, but philosophically wise, so far apart. And so it's not been as true as it used to be. I would submit, maybe you guys have heard me say this before, but one of the things that I display in my office, I'm in my office if you can't tell, that I like is that in the same exact Congress, the last one, the 117th Congress, I am the Republican senator who won the Bipartisan Policy Council's Legislative Action Award. I hang it over my plaque for receiving the Defender of Limited Government Award, only to demonstrate that you don't have to give up your principles to get along and pass legislation. And unfortunately, one of Kramer's convictions is I reject the notion that every transaction requires a loser. But unfortunately, for a lot of people, their opposition to losing is almost more important than them winning. And so I think, again, to your point, yes, it can work. Would it be better if that's the outcome? I don't know. But remembering that third leg, the precedent is not an unimportant part of the trio.
I have a political question for you. And I bringing it up, it's about our House race, but I think it's germane to all the things that we're talking about right now.
We're talking a lot about germane these days.
Yeah, well, that's right. One of the candidates in the United States House race, Rick Becker, is talking about, like, I see some interviews. He's talking about going to Washington, being a bull in a china closet, and then he's touting endorsements from. The leader of the Representative Good, the leader of the Freedom Caucus, Matt Gaetz, was Representative Matt Gaetz from Florida, who, is an instigator in a lot of the drama in the House of Representatives, and he's endorsing those things. What do you think of those endorsements? I mean, is that what North Dakotans want? Because I'm looking at that, and I mean, as a voter, I'm looking in the House, and even setting aside ideology and everything, like, I mean, Israel and Iran are at each other's necks. Russia's still bombing Ukraine. China's looking at Taiwan and licking its chops. I want a Congress that functions. I don't want to send more dysfunction. So, I mean, do you think that when North Dakotans hero Matt Gaetz endorsed Rick Becker, does that help him?
Well, I'd love to address all the things you just brought up as examples, but to answer your specific point, first of all, I think it's consistent with how Rick Becker has behaved in the legislature in North Dakota. And I don't think anybody would be surprised by that. And I do think there's a pretty large audience for Rick's message, quite honestly, Rob. And while you have a different view of it, remembering in our process where you mentioned that 5 candidates running for the House of Representatives, but right now they're running for the Republican nomination. And I think that distinction of Rick's, in some respects, it is whether I think it's sincere. Don't get me wrong. I think that's who Rick Becker is. Consider my point. But I also think it's, it might be a pretty good strategy or tactic, if you will, to be the largest vote getter in a 5-person primary, in the Republican Party in 2024. So it has that advantage. I would say, though, with regard to endorsements from other members of Congress from other districts, that to me is a little bit of an interesting strategy, because the beauty of the House is exactly that you have equal representation, or you have equal numbers of constituents as a member of the House of Representatives. It's how, and in most cases, the congressional lines are drawn to have a very homogeneous, congressional district. Now, we have the advantage, I call it an advantage, in North Dakota of only having one congressman. So even though we're a small population, we're pretty diverse compared to most congressional districts I'm familiar with that have been gerrymandered. And for sure, we're diverse in terms of our relationships, in terms of, institutions, daily newspapers, all those kinds of things. So I think you have to be a little bit careful. But I would say the House doesn't really need a lot more bulls in the China. Yeah, because so all of those issues you talked about, they're just a few of the many where the world's on fire. I mean, how about the fact that Iran's proxies, the Houthis, are killing Americans, and we're not really responding much. How about the southern border, which is really, I think, the first signal to the world, hey, we're a weak country, come after us. Or how about the awful withdrawal from Afghanistan that sent the very first signal that that we're less serious than we used to be in terms of our geopolitical responsibilities and our military might. So we have a lot of problems, and you're right. A functioning Congress is far, far better than chaos or obstructionism.
Real quick before we move on, are you supporting anyone in the House in that House race?
I've not endorsed anybody in the race. To be honest, I've been financially supportive of a couple of them. They're friends of mine, and they've asked me for financial contributions, and I've given them. As you know, one of my convictions is I didn't seek a position of influence to be neutral. But in the case of my own election, of course, I am running unopposed in the primary. I'm grateful for that, and part of the reason that I'm running unopposed in the primary is because I've tried to be a bridge within our party as well as beyond our party. And a lot of these people, in fact, I love the fact that we have 5 people interested in being North Dakota's only congressperson, a member of the House of Representatives. And I love the fact that you have the kind of diversity among them that we have. It's a pretty clear, there's pretty clear lines, but 4 or 5, 5 candidates, 4 pretty serious candidates, and maybe one less serious. But that gives people options for sure. But it also means that somebody who maybe would struggle to get 50% plus 1 in the general could win a plurality in a primary. And so I think it's going to be a fascinating race. But no, I've not endorsed anybody. But I am proud of our state for putting up such a good group.
Senator, that was sort of where I was going, because the last time you were on the show, you talked about it. You don't get in one of these positions to be neutral, and then you've chosen to be neutral. Yeah. Tell us about why you chose to endorse Kelly Armstrong for governor. Yeah. That's obviously a place where you chose not to be neutral. Yeah. Do you have relationships with both of those candidates? What made you jump into that one?
No, thanks, Chad. It's a good question, and I did it largely because I do believe Kelly's of the two the best prepared to be the governor of North Dakota. But a lot of it is the relationship piece of it. While I have a relationship, I'd say a good relationship with the lieutenant governor, with Tammy Miller, it's a newer relationship. And I've now worked with her a lot. Of course, she hasn't been in the job very long. So while we've attended a lot of things together, particularly veterans events and military events with the National Guard, we've not really worked on things like policies. Kelly, of course, and I go back much further. He was even just recently chairman of the Republican Party in North Dakota. When I ran for the Senate, he urged me, of course, like I often say, I didn't know he was after my job, but he did, he did play a role in urging me to run for the Senate and helpful in that endeavor. And of course, for nearly 6 years, we've worked very closely together in Congress. So, it's just a much stronger relationship. I'm very confident. I would also say, Chad, one of the things that I like to remind people, I'm old enough and have enough experience in North Dakota politics to remember when when Republicans didn't have every seat in the legislature or statewide, to the point where I like to remind people I'm the first Republican in my life to have this seat in the United States Senate. I say that as a bit of an admonition to Republicans, because there can tend to be this presumption that we're entitled to these jobs just because we're Republicans. And I know that's not true. North Dakotans are fiercely independent and are pretty capable of making a different decision if we give them a reason to. Kelly being a proven statewide elected person now 3 times is, in my view, well positioned to be the more likely, or at least the better bet, if you will, on winning the seat for Republicans, or winning the governorship for Republicans. So that's not unimportant. It's politics it's politics after all, and winning is one of the factors. So I think for those reasons, it was easy, frankly, for me to endorse Kelly.
So just a quick another political question. Obviously, you got endorsed by the North Dakota GOP at the convention. The congressional race was interesting. It feels like the convention maybe isn't as valuable as it once was, and you were one of the first folks to go on to the primary. What's the point of the convention with what we saw last weekend or 2 weekends ago? And does it matter? Does it matter that Alex Balazs got the congressional nomination? Is that going to affect anything come primary time?
So a couple of things. One is, first of all, I wasn't one of the first; I was the first, and Doug Burgum was the second. But I did it, Chad, back in 2012, because you could see this happening. What has manifested itself now, you can see it happening. Except that at that time, in 2012, I was defending the people who now have sort of become the majority at the convention. I was defending their right to be there when others, more establishment Republicans, didn't allow them there. They literally turned off microphones, and Ron Paul supporters wanted to have nominations for the national delegates, because the convention was so important and precious to them. Even you talk about a convention that doesn't matter. Our Republican National Convention is the one that really doesn't matter, because we do honor, and by rules, honor and respect the primaries. The Democrats, have a little more of an inside game, but even for them, it's largely that way. But they have some other guardrails. So your question was, does it matter? It matters. It just doesn't matter nearly as much as it used to. It matters if you think it's easier to get the convention endorsement than get 300 signatures, but 300 signatures are pretty easy to get. It matters in the case of Alex, which is a great illustration. Does it matter? I think it matters to Alex, because Alex came in as not knowing very many people and almost nobody knowing him, and now they do. So for him, it gave a little bit of a momentum boost. For somebody like Rick or Julie, who already have pretty good name recognition, or a former Miss America who's got really good name recognition, probably doesn't mean quite as much. The other alternative is if you have a whole bunch of money and you can spend it, or you can raise a bunch of money and buy the type of name recognition that can help you win a primary, probably doesn't mean that much. So it clearly means less, but you'd rather have it than not have it, I think, if given the choice. That it mean the endorsement.
Yeah. Do you think that, you should something? One thing that frustrates me is I don't mind the competition. I don't mind people getting in and taking their shot. None of that bothers me. What bothers me sometimes is the amount of people trying to use the rules to shut other people up. And that really, whether it's we're not going to seat these delegates from District 37, or we're not going to give somebody the bylaws that wants to run, or we're not going to give somebody a party membership that wants to be a member of the party, which happened in District 38 up here in Minot. Do you think the party? I feel like the NDGOP needs to have one set of bylaws for all the districts and just say, listen, this is let's have a debate. We'll decide what the process is. This is the process for everybody. The rules are posted on the party website. Everybody follows the same rules. What's wrong with that?
Well, if your convention is going to matter, you do have to do that. That's exactly right. Well, we don't, as Republicans, we don't really like a lot of centralized power. It is, after all, state convention to endorse state candidates.
We're just talking about rules for how we're going to select delegates.
That's right. Yeah, what are the guardrails?
We're not talking about like having that, the Politburo dictate,
Right. No, you're right. And what's even worse, quite honestly, is if you violate the rules. It's one thing if you manipulate the rules. That's distasteful, particularly within the family, right? We're supposed to all be on the same side. The problem is, for Republicans, again, I go back to when I was chairman, and we had 3 statewide elected offices. We didn't even have a majority in one of the chambers of the legislature. So I always go back to that time when there weren't very many of us. And Rob, you're the one that often says, it's a business of addition. And so, and it is, but what we're suffering from now is the only people we have to argue with is ourselves. And so our own divisions have become the adversary. Now, I'm all for that, by the way, but we're not adversaries. We're people in the same tent. It's a really big one, but we're people in the same tent that have some disagreements, but we aren't very far apart on the basics. And that's what grieves me more than anything. So somewhere along the line, and I don't know, Rob, Chad, I don't know if this is a top-down thing or if this is a bottom-up thing. Somehow it has to be facilitated. One thing I will say about this last convention that I think becomes a turning point, and that is this. When you take control, which I would submit to you, obviously that I don't know what you want to call them, but the more libertarian-leaning populist, maybe. I mean, libertarian and populist don't generally mean the same thing, but that faction of the party is now in control of it largely, and you no longer have the luxury of being a victim. And at that point, you have to stop being a victim and start governing. And my view is that this was the last time they get to have that sort of grace, if you will. And I think they're up to it. I really do. Of course, my hope is always that the burden of governing eventually weighs enough to change some behavior. But I think now we look to them for some leadership and hopefully some unity. But unity cannot mean we should all be unified. Just all agree with me, and we'll be fine.
It's amazing how much politics is just a flat circle, because whether we're talking about a Speaker of the House who becoming more bipartisan and maybe more moderate, given circumstances, to what we're talking about, inside the North Dakota Republican Party, it's all the same.
Yeah.
And good characterization, I think.
Senator, one of the things that is propped up in the certainly in the congressional primary is the idea of around the national abortion ban. President Trump is now, I believe, come out opposed to a national ban. Where are you at on that? Like, it seems like the Republican post-Roe was, yep, give it back to the states, and now it's like, well, or maybe we can try to get something done on a national level if we have the majorities. How do you think this plays out, or where are you at?
Yeah, well, it's probably, first of all, from a purely political standpoint, it is our greatest vulnerability as a party in this election cycle. I don't think there's any question. In fact, but for the controversy, everything else stacks up pretty well for us in terms of what's going on in the country and who people trust to solve them. This is a big one. Where do I stand specifically? First of all, I thought Donald Trump's, I think it was about 4-minute video, and I like you. I don't know if you're on his list, but a lot of stuff comes through, and I pretty much delete it all because I don't need to be convinced any further. I watched that one; it caught my attention. I thought it was fantastic. I thought that, and he, by the way, he needed to do it because Trump sort of floats trial balloons in a very public way, and it confuses a lot of people. He likes to see the fallout a little bit, and then he'll come out and clarify. And I thought he did a great job of it. And I think his position is a smart position. I think it frankly is his position. I don't think there was a lot of posturing there. I think it was easy for him to do that. And I thought he performed it well because it was sincere. That said, it didn't include, like you said, a federal or a national, prohibition somewhere along the line. And the 15-week thing, which is where I think a lot of people come down as a place. In fact, I think part of the reason people come down there is not just because of it's the pain-capable stuff, which is relevant, obviously. It's pretty much where I hang out, but also because it is sort of a sweet spot politically, nationally. But that doesn't mean I think it's got to be an individual thing, Chad. I think every member of Congress, every legislator, every governor, who it has to be personal and it has to be tailored to the people you work for. And what's become pretty darn clear is that the beliefs of the states and the country and the individuals and the communities before Roe versus today are not the same. And so the ultimate outcome at every level will not be the same as it was before Roe. It may be in some places, but you can't turn to a 1960 law and expect it to be as acceptable today in the post-Roe world. So Roe did not solve the issue. It solved the constitutional question, which I think it did very well. But
Dobbs, you mean? Dobbs solved it.
I'm sorry, Dobbs. Yeah, Dobbs overturning Roe. Yeah. So it moved back to the states, and that's fine. That's where it is. And I think states need to again debate it and come up with their solutions suitable for their population. At the national level, I'm not against it, but I also think that we let's play out the states and see where it lands.
It's remarkable because I think we're back. My argument is I feel like we're going to come to a more moderate place on, when I say moderate, like I don't know what other word for it, but I think a more temperate place on abortion, because one of the things I didn't like about Roe is it took this issue and it said, okay, this issue, all the other issues that the American government can govern, we can decide when people go to jail, we can decide when people have to serve in the military and do all these things. We can decide when we're going to go to other countries and kill people. For some reason, we're going to pluck this issue and set it up on a pedestal and say nobody can decide this.
Right.
I thought that was wrong. That's not how democracy works. I'm glad that it's back. And even though it's been difficult and it's such a fraught issue and for every single person who participates in the debate, it is a fraught issue. I like that we're having it. I like that we're going through it. And I think what it's going to come from is something that more of us can live with than what we had before. And again, I think it's when you work the process and you allow these things to play out and you have the debates, you arrive at something that's more acceptable to more people. I really like that about this.
Yeah, no, and that's the way we were built, right, as a country. And so when you had this one thing for 50 years, and all of a sudden you're going to change 50 years of development of the issue internally, and you're going to change it all in one day, you miss this whole transition that would have been natural and probably much more peaceful. But that said, for people who really care a lot about life, people like me, and they're always going to be passionate. We're always going to be passionate on behalf of life. But it has taken some time, and we'll see how much longer it does take to get to the point you're talking about, Rob, where there's a more temperate position. It'll be reflected by communities and states, not by one national profile, probably. And who knows, that may lead to a national 15-week ban with exceptions for rape, incest, and to take the life of the mother, or it may not. But at least it'll be more, again, to your point, temperate.
Well, I think we'll end it there. Kevin, thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure. We didn't even talk much about FISA, which everybody's, nobody wants to be spied on, guys.
Yeah, well, I guess not. Well, next time we'll get into that.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks. Kevin.
Good to be with you both. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcast, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcast and explore them all today.